Trauma Staff, well known for its ability to stun any target except for bosses, offering the team a ton of support and utility. But a weapon that is supportive in nature doesn't mean that it can't have offensive capabilities. While it'll never beat the likes of the Surge or Void Strike staves in terms of single target damage, the build we're looking at today is the king of AoE damage. If you want to top the damage scoreboards while still offering tons of stun support to the team, this is the build for you. So starting with the star of the show, the Trauma Staff. For this build, we need two very specific blessings. Fortunately, the perks matter way less, so you can just focus on blessings. The blessings we want are Blazing Spirit and Warp Nexus. You can only get value out of Blazing Spirit if you have Warp Nexus. Otherwise, if you can't reliably crit, there's no point in having Blazing Spirit in the first place. So why is Blazing Spirit good? First of all, the Trauma Staff can hit a lot of targets if you have a high blast radius stat. However, the main source of the base damage only occurs if you hit enemies with the epicenter of the attack. Anything outside that area normally takes only minimal damage. With Blazing Spirit, if we crit, every enemy hit by the crit attack gets 3 stacks of Soul Blaze, including those hit by the AoE outside of the epicenter, which is massive by the way. Now, some information about Soul Blaze. It's actually a pretty complicated mechanic, and I'll put a link down in the description if you'd like to read more about it. But anyway, all that you need to know at this point is 6 stacks of Soul Blaze is all you need to kill trash mobs and non-elite gunners. The good news is, we only need Blazing Spirit to trigger twice to get 6 stacks. The bad news is, the maximum stacks of this blessing is just 6 stacks. However, there are other ways to go beyond 6 stacks, such as with the Venting Shriek's Creeping Flames talents or Perilous Combustion. The damage can easily stack up as you're damaging many enemies with huge AoEs. So essentially, Blazing Spirit allows us to crowd control the more dangerous targets with the epicenter, while still letting us deal decent DPS on the trash mobs. However, more than just the extra damage it offers, we want this blessing for more utility. So let's talk about our keystone of choice, Warp Siphon. Warp Siphon is a good keystone in the sense that it offers a lot of benefits, such as toughness regeneration, damage, and ability cooldown reduction for the next ultimate that you cast. The big issue with this keystone is that you will lose all your warp charges every time you cast your ultimate, and there are times when there are no elites or specialists available for you to regain your warp charges. For example, maybe someone's a really good shot in the team and just takes all the kills. For this reason, we need some alternative methods to regain our warp charges. This is where the extension of our keystone, Fire Reborn, comes into play. Despite what the tooltip of this talent says, enemies do not need to die from the Soul Blaze effect for this to trigger. They just need to die with the Soul Blaze on. What this means is, we can regain warp charges with our Trauma Staff's Blazing Spirit blessing. But how effective is this blessing to talent interaction? Let's do some math. Let's lowball the scenario and suppose that we hit 5 enemies with a Trauma Staff and didn't directly kill them with the epicenter. Realistically, it's usually much more than 5 enemies because the AoE is so large, but we want to see how effective this is in a less than ideal situation. Psykers have a base crit chance of 7.5%. In the first calculation, let's suppose that we are at half peril and Warp Nexus will give us only 10% bonus crit chance, giving us a total of 17.5%. This scenario will give us a roughly 7.17% probability to regain at least 1 warp charge from these 5 enemies. However, let's say we edge our peril properly and Warp Nexus gives us a full 20% crit chance bonus. The scenario will give us a roughly 11.26% chance to regain at least 1 warp charge. For a less than ideal situation, that's a pretty good probability. We're not done with the ability interactions yet. Let's introduce more talents into the picture. Perilous Combustion, Psykinetics Aura, Seer's Presence, Warp Siphon, and Fire Reborn. What do all these talents have in common? They all contribute to our ability cooldown reduction in some way. I hear you thinking, Dre, is this another ultimate spamming build? Precisely. And our ultimate of choice is Venting Shriek, the second star of the show. So why is this ultimate so good that we want it spammed? First of all, as aforementioned, 6 stacks of Soul Blaze is all we need to kill trash mobs and non-elite gunners. If we cast this ultimate at 85% or above peril, it will apply 6 stacks of Soul Blaze to everything within 30 meters of us in a massive cone-shaped AoE. This thing also goes through walls to allow you to save teammates from Poxhounds. With our Manny ability cooldown reduction abilities, we can literally spam our ultimate the entire match. With Seer's Presence, 4% ability cooldown reduction curio perks, and 4 warp charges, the base cooldown of 30 seconds is almost cut in half. Every time we kill an elite or specialist, Psykinetics Aura triggers to shave 5% off of our current cooldown. We gain a warp charge which will shave 7.75% off our next ultimate. Every time we burn our enemies, we have a chance to get warp charges too. The best part? Because Venting Shriek helps us reduce peril by 50%, which also allows us to use our Trauma Staff and Blitz more to kill and burn even more enemies, this is literally a self-sustaining cycle of endless warp attack spamming. Now you know why the build is called the Infernostorm. So now that you understand what the build is trying to do and can play according to its strengths, let's wrap the build up. Metal and Perfect Timing are for extra benefits when we crit. If you edge your peril consistently with a Warp Nexus Blessing, you'll be critting quite often. Quietude and Soul Stealer are there for toughness regeneration. For the Blitz, we don't need Smite to stun since we have the Trauma Staff, so that's just redundant. Assail locks out Psykinetics Aura, which foils our strategy, so the only option we have is Brain Rupture. And it's not a bad choice. With the Trauma Staff, you should already practice good positioning. Brain Rupture just means you can wreck any enemy at any range, and with this much ult spam, Kinetic Resonance can also be spammed to enable super quick Brain Rupture casts all the time. With a speed stim, the charging speed gets even crazier, and this tactic is extremely effective against bosses. We won't be taking Empathic Evasion even though we crit lots, just because we don't have the attack speed to maintain this talent. Warp Rider is always a no-brainer for extra damage, especially when we need to edge our peril anyway. Kinetic Deflection is good for boss fights, reviving, or just useful in generation to save your life when shit hits the fan. Also, we're not taking Warp Battery because the heavy talent investment in our keystone already means our toughness regeneration takes a hit. If you don't mind getting less defense, feel free to try using this. With that out of the way, here are some important points to take note of. Edging your peril is key. Try to keep a mental count in your head which enemies are already at enough Soul Blaze stacks to die. This way you don't need to spend extra attacks on them and waste your DPS. Positioning is the most important thing to be aware of. If you get jumped by elite gunners, you can die very quickly. One way of dealing with this is to maintain at high peril so your Venting Shriek can have high enough stagger to interrupt them. Another way to help survive these situations is with your melee weapon. You basically want something that has mobility to get you out of these situations. You will hardly ever need your melee weapon with this build, but you do want something reliable for when you need it. So we're looking for 3 things in our melee weapon: mobility, boss damage, and the ability to fend off mutants. Finally, if you'd like to learn a staff movement technique that will improve your gameplay with a Trauma Staff or any staff, a link will be in the description for you. If you'd like to watch gameplay of this build, I've got uploads of true duo and 3-man games on the hardest difficulty, and those links will also be in the description. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'll catch you another time.